Hey, welcome everybody.
Hi.
I'm Walter Ogier. I'm your Williams 78 classmate and moderator this evening for our Williams 78 Connect program, which this evening is featuring our esteemed colleague, Dr. John Winkelman. Thanks to you all for joining. We have more than 60 people registered. I think it was up to about 68 last we looked. Several folks still joining us. It's great to see all of your faces, even if only on Zoom. So first off, I trust that you and your family are safe and healthy and well. We are using Zoom tonight. Hopefully we won't have any technical issues. So please join me in keeping our collective fingers crossed on that. We are recording the session in order to make it available to our classmates who are not able to attend tonight, as well as to other alumni. You'll be getting an email about that in a day or two's time with the link to take a look. So to recap, the objectives of the Williams 78 Connect program are to provide opportunities for our amazing class of 1978 to connect with each other in between reunions. You remember what those look like. To address a range of topics and speakers featuring the diverse interests and the experience of our class. Your class officers are working on more Connect opportunities for the fall, and your ideas are welcomed. And if you have great ones, let us know. Tonight's session with John Winkelman is going to be focused on sleep medicine, reprising his excellent talk at our 35th reunion in Williamstown. John will address topics in the field of sleep medicine, also speak to his career journey from being an aspiring pre-med at Williams and moving through a PhD degree in psychology at Harvard, subsequent specialization in psychiatry and psychobiology, and his M degree at medical school, Harvard Medical School, and a clinical practice at McLean Psychiatric Hospital in nearby Belmont. I'm in Massachusetts, so it's nearby to me. And his current role is division chief at Mass General Hospital and at Harvard Medical School. In my career, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with several other of John's colleagues at Harvard Medical School across my career. I'm sorry?
We cut that.
Yeah, I know.
All that crap.
So I have some experience with the roles that professors at Harvard Medical School play. They have about 12 different hats that they wear. I'll let John talk about some of those hats as we go forward, but it's a very complex area, and it's amazing that he manages to get any sleep himself. So the format for tonight is that John and I are going to do some initial Q&A for the first 30 minutes or so. All the attendees are going to be muted during this part of the program. And then we'll open it up for the second half hour for questions and answers from you all. I would encourage you to use the chat to let us know you have a question, and maybe write out what the question will be if you like, so John can see it in advance. But then we'll start picking people off the chat and encouraging them to join us on the call. John's willing to stay on to answer any all questions that you may have. If we run over the hour, we'll try to keep the focus on getting them done in an hour. My co-president of the class, John Pharmacus, is behind the scenes, ready to take over if the Russian trolls decide to give me the hook and to wipe me out from participating. Ashley Cartweeks from the college is also online here to help manage the unmuting and so forth. So now, indeed, we're honored to have our classmate, John Winkelman, join us this evening. Welcome, Dr. Winkelman.
Thank you very much.
So let me start with a question, I guess, top of the mind. How are you and your family holding up in the current pandemic? And how are things faring at Mass General? In particular, are you and your colleagues seeing any let up in the number of hospitalized COVID patients yet?
Sure. Well, I haven't been to my office in 4.5 months, and I don't miss that. I have a fairly long commute. I've been seeing patients this way by Zoom, which is not as much fun as it is sitting in the same room with them, but my commute's a lot better, and my wife's down in the basement doing her thing at Mass General. She's a child psychiatrist, and 3 young adult children in and out of the hospital, back and forth to where they live, and Between the three of them, probably 6 COVID tests so far, all negative, which is nice. One just flew in from where she was working in Seattle for the last week, an hour ago. And we're trying to not have her touch anything in the kitchen. Mass General was hit very hard in March, April, and early May with patients. Some of the communities right around Mass General, Chelsea, Everett, Revere, were some of the hardest hit communities in the United States, with high rates of COVID positivity and hospitalization. We maxed out on ICU beds, but now things are very, very quiet. But all clinicians are being encouraged to do what they can from home. And so I'm going to continue seeing patients by Zoom for the foreseeable future. And we've been well, I had to stop some of my research projects, but now we've got an approval to do those remotely as well. And when people need blood draws, instead of me going in and drawing the blood, they'll probably go to a local Covance or lab near them, which I'm sure they'll appreciate. So things are pretty good in Massachusetts. And I have to say, we've been very, very lucky. And it's, I think it's just part of how things work in this country, that the people who have, under stressful circumstances, do much, much better than the people who don't have. And this has been true here as well. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, maybe because we got hit early, we're have been a little more active in staving off the transmission of the virus than some places in the country. And I'll be interested to hear a little more about what working from home means for your practice when we get to a little bit later on the questions. Maybe you could start with some history. Would you take us briefly through your journey from your days at Williams, your decision to attend medical school,
Sure.
your Harvard degrees, and then specializing in sleep medicine?
Boy. I come from a family of doctors. My grandfather was a neuropathologist, a neurologist. My father was a Freudian psychiatrist who then turned to the dark side and got very involved in the development of medications, and wrote the first paper in the United States on the use of Thorazine, which in the 60s then emptied mental hospitals in the United States. So I kind of come from this brain thing naturally, I guess. It was anticipated I would be a doctor from a young age. So of course I wasn't going to be a doctor, and fought against that. And I was a pre-med in my first year at Williams. Did not do very well. I had gone to Quaker school all my life, so I never really learned how to study or many things that you're supposed to learn in school. So I didn't do particularly well. Particularly first semester organic chemistry did not do well my sophomore year. And I wanted to keep my options open. I remember I talked to a guy who was at Armstrong, a guy named Tim Dunn, if anybody remembers him. He's a big guy, football player guy. And he said to me, well, you didn't do so well in bio and chem. Really, your only option now, if you want to go to medical school, is you have to major in chemistry. And that was worth about 5 years of a very deep depression at that point, because I really did not want to major in chemistry. I loved psychology. I did a lot of psychology research at Williams. Had a great time with my roommates. A couple of them may be on here: John Lloyd, Dick Goodbody, and Jim Maxwell, who unfortunately died shortly after we graduated. I took some time. Dick and I went to Africa, and spent 6 months driving around in Africa in the spring of 1979. That was fun. I went to graduate school, continued being interested in psychology and mostly the relationship of the brain to behavior. And I got a PhD in sleep physiology because I was very interested in sleep. Sleep is a great place where the brain and behavior meet. And you can ask people about their sleep and you can record it. And it's I was fascinated when people say, why are you interested in sleep? I always say, why isn't everybody doing sleep research? Why do people go into finance or accounting or sales? I don't understand why everybody doesn't want to do sleep research. It's fun and anyway. I did my PhD looking at sleep physiology and timed it so I finished my PhD and started medical school a couple months later. And in medical school, went through various phases of, I wanted to be an emergency room doctor, then I wanted to be a pediatrician. And then I decided in the end, I was interested in neuropharmacology, the brain chemistry. And so I went into psychiatry and stayed at Mass General for that. I have to say that psychiatry is very, very difficult to practice. It really takes a lot out of you, and I decided it was just kind of too hard. And I had some patients who were very, very challenging, and developed unfortunately, very crazy ideas about me. And I decided that I was really more interested anyway in sleep research and seeing sleep patients. So I started doing full-time care of people with sleep disorders. And that was 20 years ago, and I haven't regretted that. It's been a very fulfilling specialty, and sleep has been hot, as I'm sure you're aware. Can't go anywhere now without reading something about sleep and how important sleep is. And so I have again been lucky that what I'm interested in has been fulfilling, and I've been able to make a living and get research and see lots and lots of patients over time. I can't even remember what your question was, Walter.
I think you covered it.
I ended up talking about Tim Dunn somehow in there, but
yeah, I remember back in freshman year after grades came out at the end of the first semester, people's study habits changed pretty markedly at that point. It was kind of surprising.
Mine just went downhill, unfortunately, I think. It was John Lloyd's fault.
So you got a background in psychiatry, in terms of formal training early on. In sleep medicine, there's other kinds of specialties involved, criminologists, neurologists, I guess, internal medicine folks. So how does your practice, what do you do in your practice day to day, and how does it differ because of your background in psychiatry?
Well, one of the nice things about sleep medicine is it is a multidisciplinary field. I don't have to be just one kind of ologist, with a stethoscope and saying, no, shh, 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 I'm listening to your lungs, or with a reflex hammer saying, no, shh, shh, don't say anything, I'm tapping here. So that it really, might interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, some people say holistic. It's nice because I get to look from a variety of perspectives at one phenomenon. And
is that a Williams thing, a liberal arts background?
I think that
relate to that?
I think that there was an aspect of Williams in there in that I took a few religion classes. Not because I was religious in any way, which I'm not, but because here at Williams, what they did was they studied the phenomenon of religion from a variety of perspectives. And so you could kind of walk around the thing and describe it, like the elephant, where you don't just pull its tail and say, oh, it's a snake, or its leg and say it's a tree. You can look at it from many perspectives. And I think that's one of the nice things about sleep medicine is I do pulmonary, I do neurology, I do psychiatry, I do internal medicine, and I'm not just limited to one perspective, and which is good because, as I said, in medical school, I couldn't decide what to be when I wanted to grow up, or when I did grow up. I still want to grow up. And but I think having a psychiatry perspective allows me to ask questions and have knowledge about certain things that people with a lung background or a neuro background might not have, and feel comfortable asking difficult questions, which psychiatrists certainly do. And there's so much of psychiatry involved in sleep, both as cause of sleep disorders and as consequence of sleep disorders. And even though I'm not a psychiatrist, you can take the boy out of psychiatry. You can't take psychiatry out of the boy. It's kind of a way of thinking and seeing. And so that, I think, has been helpful to me.
I remember my first boss and mentor told me that if I could change careers every 5 years, I would die a happy man. So you didn't have to do that. You kind of got it all happening within the same career, but with very different perspectives. What are some of the more common sleep disorders? And are women and men's sleep challenges generally the same? How should we think about that?
Women always have it harder, whatever it is. But just because of the society we live in. But I would say if we just look at prevalence, most common sleep disorder is insomnia. So 10, 12% of adults have insomnia, and not just occasional insomnia, but frequent and distressing sleep disturbance. So that's going to be the most common thing that you're going to see in sleep medicine practice. Now, most people that practice sleep medicine don't want to see people with insomnia, because insomnia is really difficult. It's complicated, and it takes a long time to figure it out. It's really a detective story. There's a crime, and this insomnia, the sleep disturbance, and you have to kind of bring in all the potential causes and ask lots of questions, and it takes a long time. I enjoy doing it, but it's exhausting seeing people with insomnia because there's so many different causes and consequences. Second most common sleep disorder is sleep apnea, which is an obstruction in the upper airway during sleep, where due to the anatomy of the jaw and the anatomy of the back of the throat and the muscular activity of the upper airway, there's collapse in the airway. And I'm sure a number of people in the audience here have CPAP machines. And so this is kind of the bread and butter of sleep medicine. It's wonderful to see people with sleep apnea because it's not that complicated. You say to people, you look as if you might have sleep apnea, look in their airway, looks crowded. Do you snore? Yes. Ask their bed partner, do they stop breathing? Yes, no. Send them for a sleep study. You say you have sleep apnea, and you say, now it's time to try to use CPAP. And doctors are not on the front lines there. It's other people who are on the front lines of trying to work with them getting to use the CPAP machines.
Are you able to do all of that in the current COVID environment, or is that changed?
Yes. Well, we closed the sleep laboratory at Mass General for about 3 months. We just reopened it. So we're now starting to see people again, but everybody has to have a negative COVID test within 3 days of coming into the lab. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of PPE there because we're dealing with upper airway issues. And when I do examinations, when I go back in the next few weeks and do examinations of the upper airway, I'm going to be, fully hazmated and have a shield and a mask, which should be fine.
Is treating insomnia more about pharmaceuticals or more about psychology, or?
It's about everything. That's the great thing about it is first line treatment is something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which deals with the thoughts and behaviors that lead to and result from sleeplessness. So it's psychologically interactive. I don't do so much of that because I have, you really need to see people fairly frequently. And I have right now kind of a 6-month wait to get in to see me. And so I really just don't have the capacity to do that. But I work with psychologists who do that. I do prescribe a lot of medications. I'm a great believer in medications for sleep. if CBT doesn't work. If you don't take insomnia seriously, then you don't feel like you need to use pharmaceutical approaches. But if you do take it seriously, then you're going to do what you need to do to help people to sleep. And sometimes that involves medications. And I think my background in psychopharmacology is helpful there because there are a lot of medicines that can help people sleep. Other sleep disorders, I work a lot with people with something called restless leg syndrome, which is an achy, creepy, crawly, uncomfortable feeling that happens in your legs at night where you just can't lie still or sit still. And so that's very disturbing to people. It's a neurological disorder. I've spent 20 years investigating that from a variety of perspectives, from genetics to epidemiology to cardiovascular consequences, a lot of treatments, developing medications for that. And I also see people with some less common sleep disorders like sleepwalking, sleep violence, sleep sex, sleep eating, you name the verb, and people have done it in their sleep. And sometimes then they get in trouble doing it. And so they come to me through a variety of means. But sleep is not just a simple yes or no. There can be mixtures of states where people are partly awake and partly asleep. And there's one in particular that I also see quite a bit of called REM sleep behavior disorder, or RBD, where people, instead of being paralyzed during REM sleep, are only partially paralyzed, and so they will act out their dreams. And I don't mean act out your dreams like I've always wanted to go skydiving in Hawaii. It more is I dream that I'm playing football and I've got the ball and I'm jumping, diving across the end zone. But unfortunately, I'm in my bed and I dive out of the bed and hit my head on the bedside bureau and open up a 10-inch laceration on my forehead. And so I see people who do that. And that's a very interesting disorder, unfortunately associated in many people in the future with the development of Parkinson's disease. It's one of the early symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So it gives us some insight into that disorder. So sleep disorders touch on all the body parts and all the organs and really challenge you to think from a multidisciplinary perspective.
Yeah, I remember I kicked out a window at Thompson Infirmary. It was next to the bed, having a very active dream one night. You're talking about Parkinson's, so it opens up a question about aging. We're not getting younger. What are some areas of this practice and field that we could look forward to as we get older and older? I know sleep apnea comes on with age. Are there other ones that worsen with age?
Everything worsens with age. I see people elderly patients, and the definition of elderly is anyone who's 15 years older than me. And so it's changed over time, but our ability to do lots of things is impaired. I used to be able to run faster, jump higher, pee further, and clearly I can't do all those things the way I used to be able to do. Sleep is a product of the brain. The brain makes sleep. And so it's less able to make it, number one. Number two, we've got a variety of other medical issues and medications that interfere with sleep over time, and those interrupt sleep. So I think more interrupted sleep, particularly in the last third of the night, is something we all have to look forward to. More sleep-related breathing disorders. Women, as they go through menopause, the estrogen that protected them from sleep apnea is no longer protective. Obviously, menopause itself interferes with sleep. All of the medical problems that we have, pain, shortness of breath, are going to interfere with our sleep. Our expectations about sleep should be adjusted. And as people have less demands on them in terms of kids and professions, we have more flexibility in being able to maybe sleep in some more and not being as strict in our sleep regimen. And therefore, actual insomnia disorder doesn't go up with age because the expectations of how quickly we fall asleep or fall back asleep are reduced with time. And so none of us are going to sleep the way we used to. And it's important not to get all freaked out about that. You know, the biggest threat to somebody with insomnia is anxiety about insomnia. What I have coined this term insomnia phobia. And that really becomes the issue where you get into this vicious cycle of perpetuating insomnia. And so trying to chill out a little bit about it and take an hour in the middle of the night to read or to watch a movie or God knows what is not so terrible. However, if sleep really becomes an issue where it's associated with significant distress or dysfunction, or if there's very clear breathing problems, it's something you should discuss with your healthcare provider, as we're called now. I'm not a doctor, I'm a healthcare provider.
So what are some things that have happened in the past several years, 5 years or whatever, that have really made a difference in the field?
Some very cool things. Some very cool things. So about 20 years ago, a novel peptide was discovered in the brain, in a very limited part of the brain in the hypothalamus. No one knew this peptide existed. It was discovered simultaneously by two different groups. One group was working with narcoleptic dogs at Stanford, and they discovered it. Another group working in Texas with mice discovered it. One group called it hypocretin, the other one orexin. So now it's kind of hyphenated. And it was quickly discovered that the absence of this peptide is the cause of type 1 narcolepsy, people with narcolepsy and cataplexy, people who, when they are very sleepy during the day, but when they have strong emotion, particularly laughter, they get weak in the arms or the legs and may even fall to the ground, this cataplexy. And so when you look in the cerebrospinal fluid, there's no orexin in these people. And it is probably because of an autoimmune insult. They had some attack of their immune system to this part of their brain and knocked out those neurons. And why that isn't clear, although there's a group of people who developed narcolepsy after the H1N1 vaccine, whenever that was, 10 years ago. And so it's thought that this hyperimmune response, and we're seeing some of this now with COVID, can have significant deleterious effects that are not acutely apparent, not immediately apparent. And so these people discovered orexin, and then 5 years ago, 15 years after the peptide was discovered, an orexin antagonist became available on the market. So the idea was maybe if you block orexin, you don't want to kill the cells, obviously, but block orexin, you can make people at night a little bit narcoleptic and you can treat insomnia. So now we have 2 and soon to be 3 different medications that block orexin and are useful for insomnia. And pretty soon we will have a drug that you probably nasally inhaled that is used that activates orexin and may therefore treat people with narcolepsy, replacing some of this orexin that was lost by this autoimmune insult. So that's a very cool thing. Obviously, technology is remarkable. All these nearables and wearables, people heard those expressions. The wearables like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, or these nearables, things that sit next to the bed and are either infrared or some other mechanism to record movement, respiration and heart rate, which can then measure sleep in the home environment. And those will become better and better and better over time. And I think that we, for those of us who are interested in research, we won't have to bring people into the sleep laboratory to record their sleep. We can give them a watch or one of these rings that people wear, and we can look at their sleep for weeks at a time and then do some kind of intervention and see whether that intervention modifies their sleep. I had a recent NIMH grant where we would bring them in. You don't want to go to people's houses and wire them up because that's weird. So we had them come into our research lab, and my research coordinator put all the electrodes on their head, and then they took the T back from Mass General to wherever they lived, which sometimes created some problems. We had a guy who got wrestled to the ground by the police on Cambridge Street because he had all these wires coming out of his head and a little plastic box around his chest, and they were sure that he was going to set off a bomb, and they had him down on the ground, face down, and he had to call up my research coordinator and put him on the phone to convince the police that it was actually just EEG recording equipment. So I'm looking forward to the day when we can record sleep more easily in the home environment, where it's also much more relevant to how they sleep normally rather than being in the laboratory.
You've had some of your research has parlayed its way into being an advisor to companies that were developing new technology. Maybe as a last question before we open it up, do you have any good stories from that experience or things that you were particularly excited about?
Most of the pharma contacts I've had have been in drug development. So 3 drugs that have been developed for restless leg syndrome I was very involved with and learned a lot of lessons, some good and some bad. One of the medications that I helped develop called pramipexole or Mirapex, it was incredible for restless leg syndrome, but we did a 12-week study, and over 12 weeks, it was amazing, just amazing. And, I'd see patients around that time and give them Mirapex. They'd have restless legs, I'd give them Mirapex, and 3 days later, I'd get flowers or chocolates or all kinds of nice thing, it was before email, mail saying, thank you so much. Unfortunately, it wasn't clear that over the long term, this Mirapex was going to make the restless leg syndrome worse. And so that was a lesson to me that medications that are going to be used long-term need to be studied long-term, not just for 3-month trials. And so, there's good things and bad things. I've certainly been involved with a number of startup companies, one called Zeo, one called Flex Pharma. Well, I can't remember the other names of them, all kinds of a lot of X's and Z's and some, very smart people and rich people backing them. And they said, can we give you some stock, for your efforts? And I said, sure. And I should have said, maybe it's better just to pay me, because in the end, that stock was always completely worthless. And, again, you live and you learn. And it was exciting to develop these devices or medications. Sometimes the devices are right on and they're perfect. It's just the timing is wrong. So the Zeo was a great thing you'd wear as a headband in a measured sleep, but just the timing was wrong. And so I'm not much of a businessman, honestly, but I've enjoyed, and I got to work with some really interesting, smart people, and I enjoyed that part of things.
Yeah, I think the industry batting average is about 10% of things that start into clinical trials end up being approved as drugs. So it's probably not any different in your field.
Right. Well, it sounds like my batting average in freshman baseball at Williams.
Okay. Anybody have questions? I think Doug Chumley had one. You want to unmute yourself, Doug, and ask it if you're still on.
Yeah, John, is there a difference between, I've always thought there were two different types of sleep apnea. One was obstructive, and I think the other one was called neurological. Is that right?
Central.
Yeah, central. Yeah, what's the difference, and are the treatments different?
Yeah, sure. So obstructive sleep apnea has to do with something here. And you can usually see. So I look in people's, gosh, I'm just seeing myself, my picture now. I look as if I'm like in front of a campfire or something. It's all dark and I'm all red. Anyway, looking at people's airway, and you can see oftentimes that it's obstructed. If you can't see, everybody can do this at home. It's kind of a fun little game to play with your family. Take a little flashlight, have people open their mouth real wide, and see if you can see the back of the throat. And if you can't, there's probably something that's obstructing the airway there. It's usually the soft palate, might be, if you're younger, tonsils, might just be kind of fat. And so obstructive sleep apnea is just, think of a cork being put into the airway, and you're trying to breathe, you're expanding your rib cage. You know how we breathe is we expand our rib cage and we create negative pressure inside of our lungs and suck air into our lungs, as you would through a straw. You know, if you put a straw into an old Coke bottle, you suck the Coke through the straw, and similarly we suck the air into our lungs. Unfortunately, our upper airways are a little bit like those old paper straws, which, if you remember, if you suck too hard, remember what would happen? They'd collapse. And so this is what happens here, is the airway collapses. And so instead of the airway starts kind of smaller, instead of starting like this, it starts like that. So it's like this, and each time you breathe, normal non-sleep apnea people, they breathe and it goes flexes a little bit. People who start smaller, it kind of snaps shut. And so that's obstructive sleep apnea, because you're obstructing. Central sleep apnea is where the message from the brain to breathe doesn't go down in a normal way. So it may be slowed down, it may be intermittent, and this can be caused by medications, it can be caused by cardiovascular problems, neurological problems, and so the treatments are quite different. For obstructive sleep apnea, you have CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP. Unfortunately, here in Boston, I don't know if it's just Boston, but half of my patients insist that it's CPAC, as if like you get a 6-pack and you get a CPAC too, but it's CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. You're just blowing air that you pull through a little machine that filters it, then a hose, and there's a little nasal mask at the end that blows the air in and holds open the airway so it doesn't collapse like this. The air is going down and holds it open. For central sleep apnea, there aren't such good treatments, to be honest. There are a variety of treatments. You can use CPAP to stimulate breathing with a backup rate. It's more complicated, unfortunately, to treat central sleep apnea than it is to treat obstructive sleep apnea. I'm not sure, Doug, if that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. Thanks, John.
Can you differentiate what BiPAP is versus CPAP? I use a BiPAP machine, and it's really been a miracle. I heard from one of the folks on the call here about sleep apnea and the machines 20 years ago, and I didn't do anything about it. I should have.
Well, CPAP is continuous positive airway pressure. BiPAP is the pressure is higher when you're breathing in than when you're exhaling. So that you don't have to breathe against that air getting forced down into your airway. So it's a little bit easier to breathe. And this is a little bit like, it also is called non-invasive ventilation. So you can ventilate people, and I got a lot of questions about this at the beginning of COVID from my patients who had CPAP machines. Could I use this? You know, there's a lot of worry about running out of ventilators. could I use CPAP or BiPAP as ventilation? And BiPAP is a little bit like ventilation. You're forcing air in at a higher pressure, and then at a lower pressure, you're letting the air out. So you can non-invasively ventilate people with BiPAP, and it's easy. Many people find it more comfortable than CPAP, just because the positive airway pressure is not there throughout both inspiration, breathing in, and expiration, breathing out.
Amy, you're unmuted. I know you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question, John. I know that
Hi,
we
Amy.
spoke, hey. And I know, I'm a psychotherapist, so I know the importance of sleep. And I'm telling my clients all the time how important sleep is. Yet I struggle with sleep from time to time. And I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are about CBD, some of the sort of over-the-counter, not the prescribed medications that some people, including myself, have a little more trouble with, but like CBD, or melatonin, those kinds of things for sort of the episodic insomnia sleep things that I certainly struggle with. And I'm sure some of you do too. So.
Yeah. I'm all for whatever works. And so I had a patient a number of years ago say to me, I had a lot of trouble sleeping until I started having 5 black olives before I went to bed. And they said, since then, my sleep has been great. Now, what do you say to that? I said, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
So that a lot of insomnia has to do with, particularly in people with chronic insomnia, has to do with the anxiety about sleeplessness. And a lot of the effects next day of insomnia have to do with the perception of how you slept. I'll just tell you very briefly about a study that was done. It's a really cool study. They gave people Fitbits. 50 people with insomnia. 25 people with insomnia, they had the Fitbit programmed so that in the morning, it told them they had really good sleep. The other 25, they said not good sleep, and it was random. Then they asked the people in the morning, how did you sleep last night? And 4 times a day, how much energy do you have and what's your mood like? And you can imagine what happened. The people who were told they had good sleep felt much more rested and much more optimistic and less tired and less depressed. So a lot of this has to do with our expectations and our experience.
Yeah.
However, there are a lot of people who sleep poorly. I would prefer to use treatments that are proven to be effective rather than things that aren't proven to be effective. And so this is what we would call evidence-based medicine. Now, if you want to try, melatonin has been proven to be of some value for sleep. Not great, but some value for sleep. CBD, I hear from a lot of my patients that they find it to be helpful, particularly THC, less CBD than THC. And we're not talking about people who, these are, I was going to say grandmas, but I guess that's us. They said, I never smoked back in the day and I can't believe I'm doing this now and I'm taking these gummies. So people find that to be helpful. But I am, Amy, I'm also a believer in medications that have been tested very carefully. I'm not a believer in quote unquote things, wanting to preferentially use natural things. I think just digging it out of the ground does not make it safe. There's a lot of things that you find on the sidewalk that I would not want to ingest to try to help me sleep. And some of the biggest toxins in the world are natural substances. So I think that this is a false dichotomy between natural and unnatural, chemical. I want a non-chemical approach. I don't even know what that means. I mean, psychotherapy, what you do is a chemical approach. Thoughts And words are things. They are transmitters.
Yes.
And it's a great way to influence transmitters, but it's all chemicals at a certain level.
Okay.
Or else maybe it's either chemicals or it's spiritual. Those are the two options we have.
Right. Right.
I think
Right.
Sharon Coyle Kiernan has a couple of questions. Are you,
Sorry.
can you turn yourself off mute? And
I think I'm unmuted, aren't I?
yes, you are. Great.
Hey,
Thank
Joe.
you. Yeah, Joe's hiding behind me, but he has no sleep problems. I can promise you that. One thing, just for everybody who's here, we've used non-invasive ventilation in neonates forever. I mean, CPAP and BiPAP, we felt vindicated when suddenly all the adult people wanted to use it as we do. But my two questions really deal with learning about adults. And one is that the blue lights that we have from computers and a lot of the other technology we have impact sleep. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then my second one is that Joe and I are still basically shift workers, being the type of physicians that we are. We get called out in the middle of the night. We're up in the middle of the night. Sometimes we work days. We love what we do. But tell us something about, is that going to get tougher as we get older? Is there a negative impact? Should we be doing something to protect ourselves with that?
Oh boy, Sharon. Some good ones. Blue light. Yes, light influences our circadian, our clock, which is in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, through the eye, back to the hypothalamus, and it's going to influence your clock. So bright light at night is probably not a good thing. A little bit of light is not a bad thing. I see people with sleep disorders, many of whom have what we would call cognitive hyperarousal at night and at sleep time. Their mind is racing, quote unquote, and they can't quiet it down. And for many of them, what helps quiet it down might be a screen. It might be reading a book, but it might be watching a movie. It might be listening to a podcast, but something that is going to quiet this noise that is inside of their head that is interfering with their ability to sleep. Many of us lead very, very busy lives, and the only downtime we have where there's no external stimulation is when we put our head on the pillow. And for those people whose mind then races, kind of like a gerbil on a wheel, you need to try to shut that off. And one of the ways to do that is for many people, is to watch TV. And so my feeling is that I'm going to listen to what people say, because some people are going to benefit from that kind of distraction. And like it's a masking sound. It's one sound or input that masks another one. So some people are going to benefit and other people are not. Now, it sounds as if you're working with kids, and so that kids use a lot of screens. I know my kids sleep still with the phone right next to their pillow, which is, it's just clearly not good. But we do need to keep our mind open to the possibility that they are using these screens as a mask to mask lots of worried thoughts, or even just quote unquote racing thoughts of stuff going on during the day. The key really is bright light in the morning. More important than avoiding light at night is getting light at the same time every morning to set our clock to the 24-hour cycle. That's really the most important is wake time. When you wake up and get light in the morning, sets when you're going to be able to go to sleep at night. It's like an hourglass that you flip over when you wake up in the morning, and it's got 16 hours of sand in it. And you're not really going to be able to go to sleep until all the sand is from the top down to the bottom. So that's just how it works. So then about you and Joe.
I just meant night shift, people who work
Shift
night shift.
workers.
I'm sure
Shift-
there's a lot of people who do.
There certainly are, and it's a very, very hard thing to do. And I see nurses who are on rotating shifts, people working in factories, you know, in the immediate MGH area. I just saw a guy who's makes candles overnight, and he works 4 10 to 12 hour shifts, then has 3 days off, but they're not 3 days in a row. You know, this is just terrible, and he sleeps very, very poorly. You know, we're playing with Mother Nature there, and we can only adjust our clocks roughly an hour a day. And so expecting that you're going to be able to shift from a nighttime to a daytime within 24 hours is impossible. You know, it's like going from here to Tokyo and expecting you're going to be able to be on Tokyo time immediately. It just can't happen. So you can't fool nature. We weren't meant to do this. So I tell people who are having problems with this, I'm happy to write a letter to your employer telling them that this is not good for you. Unfortunately, many people need the differential. You know, they make 10% or 20% more for working the evening or night shift, and they want that differential. And so it's just a question of them having to grin and bear it, kind of.
I think David Moore had a question about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
Oh, good. I've got a very good friend who's trying to recover from a terrible marital situation, which really has all the bearings of a post-traumatic stress because, you know, she wakes up at 4 a.m. with cold sweats and all sorts of stuff. You made a very good point about how the how the brain creates sleep. Well, actually, it's also kind of clear that the brain uses sleep as a way to cleanse itself. And recovering from post-traumatic stress is a tough job. You've mentioned a little bit like racing minds require that sometimes listening to soft music or watching a British sitcom or something. I guess my question is basically, is there a different pharmacology to help people make best use of their sleep time to cleanse their brains and heal past traumatic events, or is it really a continuum of sort of day experiences? Is there a pharmacological approach you would say is worth going by, or is it better to not?
No pharmacologic treatment for PTSD.
Okay.
PTSD is by definition going to cause sleep problems because at the core of PTSD, at the very core of it, due to the trauma, is this hypervigilance.
Right.
Inability to maintain states of decreased vigilance. People are always vigilant.
Right.
And sleep, if nothing else, is a state of decreased vigilance. So by definition, sleep and PTSD are going to be incompatible. We learn safety like that. One traumatic episode, in wartime or in an assault, unfortunately can change people's lives and change their physiology such that they then have PTSD and have this hypervigilance, which is a physiological phenomenon. And so we learn safety quickly, to always be on the lookout. And we unlearn that very slowly. And so this is a challenge. I don't work in psychotherapy kind of treatments for people with PTSD. There are certainly people that do, but you try to teach them that that life now is not as unsafe as they think it is, and to try to process whatever that means, the trauma, and recognize that now is different than then. I just saw, I guess I did see a patient this morning who was in her late 40s and has had sleep problems since she was 19 that developed at the time that her mother was terminally ill. And this woman and her father had to get up every few hours to take care of her mother in the last couple of years of her life. She's had insomnia now for 30 years as a result of that. And, you know, it's hard to know how to reach her brain, how to teach her that the situation that was appropriate 30 years ago is no longer appropriate. She learned that lesson too well then. And we learn certain things quickly and we unlearn them slowly. And particularly when it involves safety and, or in this case, taking care of someone else. So it's a real challenge, David. But I think that psychological therapies are really the best way to address PTSD-related insomnia. And from 5 years working as the medical director of the sleep lab in McLean, where I saw, which at the time was a 500-bed hospital, seeing a lot of people with PTSD, medications are generally not effective in people with PTSD the way they are in people with other forms of insomnia.
Great. So a basic sleep aid might make some sense, but anything more serious than that is.
Well, I'm not sure what a basic or a serious sleep aid. I don't know.
Well, if a little melatonin helps her get to sleep, or she can take a very, very low dose of something to get her to sleep, that's great. But that's really, you know, if it works, that's great. But most importantly, the more therapeutic through talking and understanding and working, using the rational side to try to control the irrational is just, it'll take time. It's always hard, but going the long route is better than trying to find some, you know.
Well, I'm a great believer in finding.
Songs about.
I'm a great believer in finding shortcuts if they're going to work.
Right.
I'm just not sure that in this case they're the best approach.
Okay, thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
So John, we have 3 more questions in the chat. I'm not sure we're gonna, well, why don't maybe
I'm
you can try to
available.
give short answers and we can keep going. The first one is from Richard Usettine, about substance abuse.
Hey, John. I run a free clinic for women who are recovering from substance abuse, and about over 90% of them have been sexually abused as children, and they've self-medicated, and now they are off their substances, whether it be meth or heroin or alcohol. And the number one reason we have people coming into our clinic is for insomnia. So I was just wondering if you could shed some light on their plight and any suggestions you have to help people who are recovering from substance abuse.
Yeah, these are these poor women. I mean, we just got finished talking about PTSD.
Yes, of course.
And they may have grown up, in addition to the sexual abuse that they had, they may have grown up in chaotic environments where nighttime was not a kind of quiet, relaxing, your mother bringing you brownies, you know, or chocolate chip cookies before bed and tucking you in was what was happening. So all of the associations that we have to that time are quite distinct for them. And then additionally, they have the long-term withdrawal from substances, many of the substances probably addressing some of the psychological distress or assisting with their sleeplessness. So, you know, many people turn to alcohol or drugs to help them fall asleep. We've just gotten funding from National Institute of Drug Abuse to do a study at an opioid detox in south of Boston in Quincy, looking at the sleep of people in not in acute detox, but in the step down unit. So they've been off of opioids for a week, and now they're there for another 2 weeks, trying to address those sleep problems.
Yeah, I mean, my best results have been with trazodone and amitriptyline, and I don't know what you think about those.
Good drugs.
Yeah.
Good drugs, you know, not going to be abused really by many people. So safe in that respect. Gabapentin,
Yeah, I like that too.
which is useful. Unfortunately, I understand now it's being sold on the street as Johnny's, which I have to say, I take that personally, being a John myself. But, I think many things can have street value. So I would say, so the sedating antidepressants, trazodone, amitriptyline, doxepin, mirtazapine, any of those, gabapentin, quetiapine, Seroquel.
Yeah.
There's the nice thing about pharmacology of sleep is regulated by so many different neurotransmitters in the brain that there's a lot of ways to get at it pharmacologically. So it's a lot of opportunities as it sounds like you're using, I think, trying to work with them, have a therapist work with them to try to help them find some way that the sleep environment can be relaxing, comfortable, and most importantly, safe, will be valuable, because clearly they've come off of many, many years of that time of night in bed. Many people who are sexually assaulted were sexually assaulted at night in bed.
Yeah.
And then you say, go down, go lie down and relax. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's not going to help. That's not going to happen. People have one panic attack in an elevator and they never want to go into an elevator again. And they can walk up the stairs to the 6th floor. But when it comes to sleep, there's no elevator. There's no, you have to sleep.
Yeah.
And so there's no way to avoid that feeling I'm sleepy and I'm going to lie down and try to go to sleep. But then all of those associations develop. So it's clearly a very difficult bunch of people, and I applaud you for the work that you're doing. I really, really do.
Thank you.
Let's do 2 more questions. Peter Thayer, are you still in?
Let's see. Yes, I'm here.
I have to see this guy. I haven't been 50 years, maybe.
Yeah. How you doing, John?
I can't see him anyway.
Oh, I hope I'm here. I read the book, Why We Sleep. It was given to me at Christmas, and I'm just curious what your take is on that book, and whether it is, apparently it was controversial, and I'm just curious what your read on that, if it's something you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah. I like the book. I like the guy. I worked with him at Brigham and Women's for a number of years before he went to Berkeley. I'm pissed off that he wrote the book and that I didn't.
I kept looking for you in the credits somehow.
My wife was after me for many years. You got to write a book. You're not going back on on those TV shows I did many years of going on the big TV shows. She said, you're not going back on those shows till you got a book. And Matt wrote a good book. He's a little bit negative about sleep medications. And I emailed him after the book came out and had some quotes from my patients who had read the book and seen him on whatever show, saying that they felt shamed by him about the use of the medications. And he kind of apologized for that. And he said that, on these shows, they take snippets, sound bites, and, which is absolutely true. But then actually looking at the chapter, he's more negative on medications than I think is warranted. This may be a little bit of a kind of whether you have an MD or whether you have a PhD. PhDs are all about behavioral and cognitive treatments, and MDs can kind of be all about medications when in fact both are valuable. But I think other than that, I think it serves a useful purpose, but making people feel ashamed about the fact that they use sleeping medications is not right. It's not right to make people feel ashamed they take antidepressants. It's not right to make people feel ashamed they use CPAP. It's not right to make people feel ashamed that they take insulin. These are medical problems. This is not a matter of will or weakness. And so you need to respect that these problems, and therefore respect the treatment options that people choose.
Thanks.
Spoken like a true chemistry major. I think Kate will get the last question in. Kate Lombardi.
Hey, John, thank you so much for doing this. Where is he? I can't see him.
I look like I'm at a campfire.
There you
in
are.
front of a
Pass us some s'mores, please.
Yeah, why is it that way? I don't know. It's better if I do like that. Anyway,
It's all good. So I actually don't know anyone who sleeps well, myself included. I know people with a variety of different things, but I feel like since COVID and the social isolation, it's gotten far worse. It's gotten worse for me, but it's gotten worse for almost everyone I know. And is it simply just the heightened anxiety and uncertainty around the pandemic, or do you think there's something else going on? And do you have any thoughts about it?
you know, there's some data coming out on this. There does seem to be an increase in nightmare frequency and intensity. There does seem to be a little bit of a shift in timing of sleep, so that people are going to bed a little bit later and waking up a little bit later, which, you know, because people aren't having to commute. And for young people, that can be beneficial because they would prefer to go to bed later and wake up later. There are certainly people whose sleep has been disturbed. There's a lot of anxiety. There was just, for anybody who reads JAMA, there was a really interesting short paper that just came out in JAMA that asked a very large number of people in April 2018 and again in April 2020, not the same people, but like 50,000 people, random sample, where they filled out this psychological distress scale. And they identified people as those people with severe psychological distress. The highest rates of severe psychological distress were among those 18 to 29-year-olds, almost 25% of people. Second highest group were people with a household income less than $35,000, around 15% severe psychological distress. Third was Hispanics with about 12% psychological distress. Overall is about 8% in the US population, 8 to 10%. The lowest rate of psychological distress was in people over the age of 55. And so I was talking about this with my 3 20-something kids the other day, and my 22-year-old said, well, of course that makes sense. I said, well, why does that make sense that people like me would have the lowest rate of psychological distress? Because he said, because you don't do anything. It doesn't matter if you're isolating at home, because your life is so boring. It was so boring, and it continues the same amount of boring. You know, you don't feel like you're getting deprived of anything. Whereas 18 to 29-year-olds, he said, you know, he feels it. He's, you know, doing online poker with his 5 friends from high school now. They would otherwise be getting together, you know, going swimming or around a campfire or what have you. They're giving up a lot. And of course, you know, they have no job prospects now. Many people had jobs lined up that jobs don't exist anymore. So that is a kind of a long parenthetical statement about who's going to be affected by distress. I think it makes perfect sense that people who are distressed are going to have more problems with sleep. I think it makes reasonable sense to try to reality test that distress before bed. If there are particular things that are worrying you, I encourage people to keep worry diaries, to write down their worries kind of late afternoon and list them down and some solutions, rather than first addressing them for the first time when you put your head down on the pillow. That's probably not a good idea to be doing it then. It's an uncertain time. People who are going to be more prone to distress at uncertain times are going to, and people are going to express this through their sleep, are going to be more prone to have sleep problems. Some people have more migraines, some people have more diarrhea, some people have more chest pain. and some people, their Achilles heel is sleep. And I think if it gets to be a chronic issue, it really does make sense to try to talk to your healthcare provider, talk to a therapist, and even discuss potential medication approaches, or certainly cognitive behavioral therapy. Just to note that cognitive behavioral therapy is available digitally. You don't have to go see a therapist now. You can do digital CBT. And the first digital CBT was just cleared by the FDA, called Somryst, and it's a demonstrated efficacy for insomnia. And
just to follow up, was there any difference between the April 1 year to the next in terms of people's?
Oh, dramatic increases from 2018 to 2020.
I presume so, and I was.
Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear. Yeah, dramatic increases across the board. But particularly, we saw it in those three groups of vulnerable people for this particular stressor. You know, people who don't make money and who probably lost their jobs and can't telecommute and sit at home, you know, doing Zoom all day. And then young people who can't go out and party the way they usually want to.
Yeah, and people who can't see their kids or their grandchildren. We don't really have no life, despite my kids are older than yours, and it's, you know.
Yeah.
20-year-old perspective, a perspective from the 20s.
Yeah, but we also do have perspective and recognize that this will probably end, whereas a 20-year-old, this is what they know. That it feels like this is the end, and I think we may be more optimistic than them, hopefully. Anyway,
not to make light of it, but it sounds like we identified something that it gets better with age rather than the other way around. So maybe a good thing to close on. Although we got to worry about our kids, and some of us are getting towards grandkids as well.
Yes.
Any last comments from anybody quickly before we sign off? Well, I want to thank John Winkleman for a very stimulating and interesting discussion. Fascinating area that affects all of us, and we had a good crowd to listen. Thank you very much, John.
It was my pleasure. It's great seeing so many familiar faces. Kevin and Edith, wonderful. My old roommates did not put on their video cameras, and that's unfortunate. But anyway, I appreciate everyone's attendance. Thank you very much, and don't hesitate to send me an email if there are any sleep issues that I wasn't able to address in this time.
And thanks to John Farmakas and Kate Lombardi for helping to tee up the series. We will be coming at you with some more hot dates in the fall, and look forward to doing this again.
Great.
Everybody, have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Sleep
John.
well.
Thanks, Walter.
Yeah.
Great job.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.